The stagecoach lurched to a stop, sending dust swirling through the dry Montana air. Clara Morrison pressed her gloved hand against the worn leather seat, steadying herself as her heart hammered against her ribs. Through the small window she could see him, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a weathered Stetson, standing beside a boy no more than 7 years old. This was Samuel Garrett, the rancher who'd sent for her, the man whose letters had been kind but sparse, the stranger she'd agreed to marry. But it was the boy who made her breath catch. He stood rigid, his small face set in stone, eyes dark and unreadable beneath the brim of his own hat, a miniature version of his father's. There was something in that child's expression that sent a chill down Clara's spine despite the blazing afternoon sun. She'd come from Boston, fleeing a life of genteel poverty and broken promises, answering an advertisement that promised nothing more than honest work and a home. But now, stepping down from that stagecoach onto the sun-baked earth of Copper Ridge, Montana, Clara realized she may have traded one prison for another. Samuel removed his hat, revealing sun-weathered features and eyes the color of storm clouds. He was younger than she'd imagined, perhaps 35, but carried himself like a man who'd lived twice that long. "Miss Morrison," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "Welcome to Copper Ridge." Clara forced a smile, but before she could respond, the boy stepped forward, his jaw set with determination far beyond his years. "You can send her back, Pa," he said, loud enough for everyone at the depot to hear. "We don't need her." And in that moment, Clara understood that the real battle wouldn't be with the harsh Montana wilderness. It would be with a 7-year-old boy who'd already decided she didn't belong. The wagon ride to the Garrett Ranch stretched out in uncomfortable silence, broken only by the creak of wheels and the steady clip-clop of horses' hooves. Clara sat between Samuel and his son, feeling like an intruder in a space where she clearly wasn't welcome. The boy, Thomas Samuel had called him, sat rigid, his small body angled away from her as if even accidental contact would be unbearable. Samuel had apologized for his son's rudeness at the depot, but his words felt hollow, rehearsed. Clara could see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged despite his upright posture. This was a man carrying burdens too heavy for one person, yet too proud to admit it. "Thomas lost his mother 2 years ago," Samuel finally said, his voice barely audible over the wagon's rumble. "Influenza took her in 3 days. He hasn't been the same since." Clara's heart softened despite the boy's hostility. She knew grief. It had been her companion for years after her own parents' deaths. But before she could respond, Thomas spoke up. "My ma was the best cook in 3 counties, he said, his voice sharp with challenge. "She could rope a calf faster than most men. She weren't afraid of nothing." The implication hung in the air like smoke. "And you'll never measure up." Clara looked down at her soft Boston hands, her impractical traveling dress, and felt the truth of his words. She was a city woman, raised on literature and piano lessons, not cattle and campfires. What business did she have here, in this vast, unforgiving landscape? The ranch appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a sprawling homestead of weathered wood and promise. The main house was larger than Clara had expected, 2 stories with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Outbuildings dotted the property. A barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and what looked like a chicken coop. In the distance, cattle grazed on rolling hills that stretched endlessly toward purple mountains. It was beautiful in a stark, honest way that made Clara's chest tighten. "It's not much," Samuel said, mistaking her silence for disappointment. "But it's honest land. Good water, good grazing. We run about 500 head of cattle. Got 3 ranch hands who help during busy seasons." "It's more than I expected," Clara said truthfully. It's grand." For the first time, Samuel's expression softened into something almost like a smile. But it vanished when Thomas jumped from the wagon before it fully stopped and ran toward the house without a backward glance. Samuel helped Clara down, his hand rough but surprisingly gentle. "I should apologize," he said, still not quite meeting her eyes. "I haven't been honest with you, Miss Morrison. In my letters, I made this seem like a straightforward arrangement, a housekeeper who might become a wife in time. But the truth is more complicated. Clara's stomach dropped. How so? Thomas has been running off the help, Samuel admitted, his jaw tight with frustration. 3 housekeepers in 18 months. One lasted only 2 days. He hides their things, puts salt in their sugar, sets loose animals in their rooms. He's determined that no woman will replace his mother. Then why bring me here? Clara asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Why let me travel 1,500 miles if... Because I'm desperate? Samuel interrupted, and the raw honesty in his voice stopped her cold. This ranch is falling apart. I can barely keep up with the cattle, the books, the house. Thomas is wild as a Mustang and twice as stubborn. I need help, Miss Morrison. But more than that, I need someone who won't give up when things get hard. He finally looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw something in those storm-gray eyes that made her breath catch. Not pity, not calculation, but hope. Fragile, desperate hope. In your letters, you wrote about losing your parents, Samuel continued. About being alone in Boston, working as a seamstress and barely making ends meet. You wrote about wanting a fresh start, about being tired of empty rooms and emptier futures. Those words, they resonated with me. I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd understand what it's like to feel like you're drowning. Clara stood there in the Montana dust, her traveling trunk at her feet, and felt the weight of a decision pressing down on her shoulders. She could demand he put her on the next stagecoach back to Boston. She'd be within her rights. The arrangement had been misrepresented, after all. But Boston held nothing for her except loneliness and poverty. And something in Samuel Garrett's desperate honesty called to a part of her she'd thought long dead, the part that still believed in second chances. "Show me to my room," she said quietly. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Samuel's shoulders sagged with relief, but Clara didn't miss the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He didn't think she'd last any longer than the others. She'd prove him wrong. Clara's room was on the 2nd floor, small but clean, with a window overlooking the eastern pastures. Or it would have been clean if not for the dead mouse strategically placed on her pillow. Thomas's work, obviously. The boy had the subtlety of a thunderstorm. She picked up the stiff little corpse by its tail, descended the stairs, and found Thomas in the kitchen, pretending to read a book while sneaking glances toward the staircase. He'd been waiting to hear her scream. "Thank you for the gift," Clara said pleasantly, holding up the mouse. "But I already have one." Thomas's eyes widened in surprise before narrowing with suspicion. "You ain't scared of a dead mouse?" "Hardly. I grew up in Boston tenements before my parents died. We had rats the size of cats." She walked past him to the back door and tossed the mouse outside. "You'll need to try harder than that." She could feel his confused stare boring into her back as she explored the kitchen. It was a disaster. Dried food crusted on surfaces, dishes piled in the sink, a layer of grime coating everything. The stove was cold, and when Clara checked the pantry, she found it poorly organized but adequately stocked. Samuel appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "I need to check on the north pasture fence. There's beans and bacon in the pantry if you want to make dinner. I'll be back before dark." "I'll need the kitchen cleaned first," Clara said, surveying the mess. "Thomas can help me." "Like hell I will." Thomas jumped up, his book falling to the floor. "Thomas Garrett." Samuel's voice cracked like a whip. "You'll mind your language and do as Miss Morrison says." Father and son stared at each other in a silent battle of wills. Clara recognized the dynamic instantly. Samuel wanted to enforce discipline, but guilt over his son's loss made him weak. The boy had learned to exploit that weakness expertly. "It's all right," Clara said, surprising them both. "Thomas doesn't have to help. I'll manage." She saw the confusion flicker across both their faces. Samuel looked torn between relief and shame. Thomas looked suspicious, like he was waiting for the trap. "I'll be back for dinner," Samuel said finally, settling his hat back on his head and escaping to his ranch work. Clara rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She filled a large pot with water and set it on the stove to heat, then began clearing the dishes. Thomas retreated to a corner, watching her with wary eyes. "Why ain't you mad?" he finally asked. "About what? The mouse or the mess?" "Any of it." The other ladies would have been crying by now. Clara paused in her scrubbing, considering her answer. "I suppose because I understand." "Understand what?" "That you're scared." She turned to face him fully. "You think if you make me leave, everything can go back to how it was. But it can't, Thomas. Your mother's not coming back, no matter how many housekeepers you run off." The boy's face went white, then red. "You don't know nothing about my ma." "You're right. I don't. But I know about losing someone you love. I know about that hole it leaves inside you that never quite fills up again. I know about being angry at the world because it kept spinning when yours stopped." Thomas's hands clenched into fists. "My pa don't need you. I can take care of him." "I'm sure you try," Clara said gently. "But you're 7 years old, Thomas. You shouldn't have to take care of anyone. You should be allowed to just be a boy." "I ain't no baby." He grabbed his book and stormed toward the door, but Clara's next words stopped him. "Your mother taught you to read, didn't she?" Thomas froze, his back to her. "That's a good book you're pretending to read," Clara continued. "Treasure Island. I've read it 3 times. Jim Hawkins reminds me of you. Brave, loyal, maybe a bit stubborn." Slowly, Thomas turned around. "You know Treasure Island? Know it? I have a collection of adventure books in my trunk. Treasure Island, Robinson Crusoe, The Last of the Mohicans. I was hoping to find someone who might want to read them with me, but I suppose I'll just have to read them alone." She could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the desire to remain hostile battling against the curiosity of a boy who loved stories. "I got chores," he finally muttered, but his voice had lost its sharp edge. "Of course. I'll be here if you change your mind." After he left, Clara returned to cleaning, her hands steady even as doubt crept in. She'd won a small battle, but the war was far from over, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else at play here, something deeper than a boy's grief driving his hostility. That night, as Clara prepared a simple dinner of beans, bacon, and cornbread, she heard voices outside. Samuel's low rumble and Thomas's higher pitch, arguing about something. She couldn't make out the words, but the tension was unmistakable. She was about to call them in for dinner when Thomas burst through the door, his face flushed and his eyes bright with tears he refused to shed. "Tell her, Pa," he shouted. "Tell her the truth about why you really sent for her." Samuel stood in the doorway, the setting sun casting long shadows across his weathered face. His expression was grim as a hanging judge, and Clara felt her stomach twist with apprehension. "Thomas, go to your room," Samuel said quietly. "No. She deserves to know." The boy's voice cracked with emotion. "You said we needed help with the ranch, but that ain't the whole truth, is it?" Clara set down the spoon she'd been using to stir the beans. "What's he talking about, Samuel?" Samuel removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. His jaw worked as if chewing on words too bitter to speak. Finally, he sighed, a sound carrying the weight of the world. "The bank holds a note on this ranch," he said. $10,000, due in 3 months. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Clara knew enough about ranching to understand that was a substantial sum, especially for an operation this size. "I took the loan 5 years ago to expand the herd and improve the property," Samuel continued. "It was a good investment, or would have been if Martha hadn't gotten sick. Medical bills, funeral costs, then trying to keep everything running with a grieving child and no help. I fell behind." "Why didn't you mention this in your letters?" Clara asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Because what woman would agree to marry into a failing ranch?" Samuel's laugh was bitter. "I needed someone capable, someone who could help me turn things around. The last housekeeper I hired couldn't cook, couldn't manage accounts, couldn't handle ranch life. Time's running out, Miss Morrison. I needed someone who could be a real partner, not just hired help." "So you lied to me." "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything." Clara felt the familiar sting of betrayal. Men and their half-truths, their convenient omissions. She'd fled Boston to escape exactly this kind of manipulation. "There's more," Thomas said, his young voice cutting through the tension. "Tell her about the Hastings." Samuel's face darkened. "Thomas, that's enough." "No, it ain't." The boy turned to Clara, his eyes fierce. "The Hastings own half the county. Old man Hastings wants our land, 'cause it's got the best water rights. He's been offering to buy us out for years. But Pa won't sell. Ma wouldn't neither. Said this land was Thomas Garrett land, and no Hastings would ever get their greedy hands on it." Clara looked between father and son, understanding beginning to dawn. "So when you default on the loan, the bank will foreclose," Samuel said flatly. "And the bank's president is Donald Hastings's brother-in-law. You see how it works? They've got it all arranged nice and legal. In 3 months, everything my father built, everything I've worked for, becomes Hastings' property. Unless you can pay the note," Clara said, "which requires a miracle, or a very good fall cattle sale and a wife who can help me cut costs, manage better, and keep this place running while I focus on the herd." Samuel's eyes met hers, and she saw the raw desperation there again. "I know it's not fair to you, Miss Morrison. I know you deserved honesty from the start. But I'm fighting for my son's future here. A man does desperate things when he's desperate." Clara walked to the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. The ranch sprawled before her, beautiful and brutal in the fading light. She thought about Boston, about her tiny rented room and the endless parade of torn hems and frayed cuffs she'd mended for pennies. She thought about the hollow feeling in her chest every morning when she woke up alone, going nowhere, being nobody. "Why should I stay?" she asked quietly. "Give me one good reason." Samuel was silent for a long moment. Then Thomas spoke up, his voice small and uncertain. "Because Pa was happy when he got your letters." Clara turned, surprised. The boy wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the floor, his hands clenched at his sides. "After Ma died, Pa stopped smiling," Thomas continued. "He worked from dawn till dark, barely ate, barely talked. But when your letters came, he'd sit at the kitchen table and read 'em over and over. He'd get this look on his face like maybe things could be okay again. I hated you for it. Hated that some stranger's words could make him feel something when I couldn't." Tears streamed down the boy's face now, and Clara's heart broke for him. "I didn't want you to come," Thomas said. "But when I saw you step off that stagecoach, looking scared but trying not to show it, I thought maybe you were brave like Ma. Maybe you wouldn't run when things got hard." He finally looked up at her, his young face wet with tears. "But I was wrong. You're just like the others. You're gonna leave." Clara crossed the room and knelt in front of Thomas, bringing herself to his eye level. The boy tried to pull away, but she caught his hands gently in hers. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. Samuel's head snapped up. "Miss Morrison." "It's Clara," she interrupted. "And I said I'm not leaving. This ranch needs help, you both need help, and God knows I need a purpose beyond sewing other people's clothes. So we have 3 months to save this place. Then we'd better stop wasting time and get to work." That night, after Thomas had finally been convinced to go to bed, Clara and Samuel sat at the kitchen table with the ranch accounts spread between them. The ledger told a grim story of mounting debts and dwindling resources, but Clara had spent years managing a household on nothing. She knew how to stretch a dollar until it screamed. "The hands are costing you too much," she said, running her finger down a column of numbers. 3 men full-time when you only need them during roundup and branding? "I need help with the day-to-day work," Samuel protested. "You have help. You have me now." Clara looked up from the ledger. "I may not know cattle yet, but I can learn. I can ride, I took lessons as a girl. I can shoot, my father taught me before he died. And I'm not afraid of hard work." Samuel's expression was skeptical. "This isn't a Sunday ride in Boston Common, Clara. Ranch work is brutal. 14-hour days in all weather. You'd be up before dawn, working till dark. As opposed to my easy life as a seamstress? Samuel, I once sewed for 16 hours straight to finish a wedding dress because the client needed it the next day and I needed the money to pay rent. I fainted twice and kept sewing. Don't tell me about hard work. For the first time since she'd arrived, Samuel looked at her with something like respect. All right, say we cut back to one hand, that's $70 a month saved. What else? They worked through the night, building a plan piece by piece. Clara would take over all cooking, cleaning, and household management. She'd learn to help with the cattle, manage the books, and handle correspondence. They'd cut costs everywhere possible. No new equipment unless absolutely necessary. No luxuries, careful management of supplies. If we sell the cattle at peak price in the fall, and if we can cut our expenses enough, we might scrape together enough to pay the note, Samuel said, but his voice lacked conviction. That's a lot of ifs. Then we need to create some certainties, Clara said. She tapped another column in the ledger. What about the horses? You have 8 horses for a 3-person operation. Martha bred quarter horses as a side business. Some of them are her bloodline. Thomas would never forgive me for selling them. Clara considered this. What if we don't sell them? What if we use them? Martha had a reputation, you said. What if we started breeding and selling again? It won't help with the immediate deadline, but it could bring in additional income. I don't know the first thing about horse breeding, but I'm betting someone in this county does. We find an expert, we learn, we build on what Martha started. We turn this from a failing cattle ranch into a diversified operation. Samuel stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. You really think we can do this? I think we can try, and I think trying is better than giving up. They talked until the early hours of morning, planning and calculating and slowly building something that looked almost like hope. When Clara finally climbed the stairs to her room, exhausted but energized, she found a piece of paper slipped under her door. In childish handwriting it read, I'm sorry about the mouse. Can I read one of your books? Thomas. Clara smiled, folding the note carefully. It was a start. The next morning, she woke before dawn to the sound of Samuel moving around downstairs. She dressed quickly in her plainest dress and headed to the kitchen, where she found him making coffee. You don't have to be up this early, he said, surprised. If I'm going to help run this ranch, I need to learn the routine. What's first? What followed was a crash course in ranch life. Samuel showed her how to feed the chickens, collect eggs, milk the cow, and prepare a proper ranch breakfast. Clara's soft hands blistered and ached, but she gritted her teeth and kept working. Thomas appeared as the sun crested the horizon, eyeing Clara warily. She dished him up a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits without comment and watched him eat. After breakfast, I need to ride out to check the north fence, Samuel said. There's been some damage. Might be cattle getting through to the creek. I'll come with you, Clara said. Clara, it's a 4-hour ride. Then we'd better get started. Samuel looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Thomas, you'll stay here and work on your lessons. I want to come too, the boy protested. Not today. Miss Clara and I need to discuss ranch business. Thomas's face fell, but he didn't argue further. As Clara and Samuel prepared to ride out, she caught the boy watching from the window, his expression unreadable. The ride to the north fence was beautiful and brutal. Clara's muscles screamed as they crossed rolling hills and navigated rocky terrain. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to slow down or turn back. She'd meant what she said. She wasn't afraid of hard work. When they finally reached the damaged fence, Samuel dismounted and examined the broken posts and trampled wire. His expression was grim. This wasn't cattle, he said quietly. Clara climbed down from her horse, her legs shaky. What do you mean? Samuel pointed to the clean cuts in the wire, the deliberately broken posts. Someone did this on purpose, and I'm betting I know exactly who. The Hastings Ranch sat like a sprawling empire on the western edge of the county, a stark contrast to the Garrett homestead. Where Samuel's ranch showed wear and honest toil, the Hastings property gleamed with fresh paint and polished prosperity. Clara sat beside Samuel in the wagon, her jaw set with determination as they rolled up the long drive to the main house. Let me do the talking, Samuel said for the third time. I'll speak when I need to, Clara replied evenly. Donald Hastings was waiting on his porch, a calculated message that he'd seen them coming and couldn't be bothered to meet them properly. He was a large man, barrel-chested and red-faced, with the kind of confidence that came from always getting his way. Samuel Garrett, he called out, not rising from his rocking chair. Heard you brought yourself a mail-order bride. That's desperate, even for you. Clara felt Samuel tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. Mr. Hastings, I presume? Your reputation precedes you. Hastings's eyes narrowed as he finally stood, taking in Clara's travel-worn dress and work-roughened hands. And what reputation would that be, Mrs. Garrett? Miss Morrison, actually. We haven't yet had the ceremony. Clara stepped down from the wagon without waiting for Samuel's help. And your reputation is that of a man who knows good land when he sees it. The Garrett Ranch has the best water rights in the county, excellent grazing, and room for expansion. I can see why you'd want it. Hastings's expression shifted from contempt to calculation. Smart woman. That's rare out here. So you understand the situation then. I understand that someone cut the north fence line on the Garrett property last night, Clara said. I also understand that cattle trespass is a serious offense, especially when it's been engineered. Careful with your accusations, Hastings said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. You got proof. I have wire cutters with fresh metal residue and boot prints that match those of your foreman's particular brand of boots. He was in town last Tuesday, and I made note of them. I also have an understanding of territorial law that says engineered trespass can result in significant fines and even criminal charges. This was partially bluff. Clara had seen boot prints but had no real way to match them. But she'd learned in Boston that confidence could carry you through when evidence was thin. Hastings studied her with new interest. You're not what I expected. Few things are, Mr. Hastings, which brings me to why we're here. The fence damage will be reported to the sheriff. But that's not all we want to discuss. Samuel shot her a surprised look, but Clara continued. We know about your arrangement with the bank. We know you're waiting for foreclosure. But here's what you don't know. We're going to meet that note. And when we do, the Garrett Ranch will continue to operate, and your plans for expansion will need to look elsewhere. Hastings laughed, a booming sound without humor. You think you can save that dying ranch in 3 months? Samuel, your woman's got spirit. I'll give you that, but she's delusional. Maybe, Clara said, or maybe you're underestimating us. Either way, I wanted you to know face to face. We're not selling, we're not giving up, and we're not going to tolerate any more sabotage. If another fence gets cut, if cattle go missing, if anything else happens that even smells like interference, I'll make so much noise the territorial governor will hear about it. Do we understand each other? For a long moment, Hastings just stared at her. Then his face broke into a genuine grin. I'll be damned. Samuel, you might have actually found yourself a fighter. He turned back to Clara. All right, Miss Morrison. I'll play fair, for now. But when you fail, and you will fail, I'll be there to make a generous offer on your land. And you'll take it, because by then you'll have no other choice. We'll see, Clara said, climbing back into the wagon. As they drove away, Samuel was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen. Maybe both, Clara admitted, her hands shaking now that the confrontation was over. But men like Hastings respect strength. If I'd cowered or let you do all the talking, he'd have seen weakness. This way, at least he knows we're not easy targets. You mentioned reporting to the sheriff. And we will, today. Even if it doesn't lead anywhere, it establishes a pattern. If anything else happens, we have documentation. Samuel looked at her with undisguised admiration. Where did you learn to stand up to men like that? Boston, Clara said simply. You think Montana has a monopoly on bullies? I dealt with landlords, creditors, and employers who thought a woman alone was easy prey. I learned quickly that you either stand up for yourself or get trampled. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the morning sun warming their faces. Clara felt something shift between them, a partnership forming, fragile but real. "Thank you," Samuel said quietly, "for fighting for us." "For us?" Clara repeated, testing the words. They felt right somehow, like she was finally part of something instead of just surviving alone. When they returned to the ranch, Thomas was waiting on the porch, a book clutched in his hands. He held it out to Clara as she climbed down from the wagon. "Will you read with me?" he asked, his voice small. "Like you said." Clara took the book, Treasure Island, and smiled. "I'd like that very much." 6 weeks passed in a blur of relentless work. Clara woke before dawn and collapsed into bed long after dark, her body aching and her hands raw despite the gloves Samuel had bought her. She learned to rope cattle, mend fences, and manage the books. She cooked meals for the remaining ranch hand and kept the house from falling into chaos. She read with Thomas every evening, slowly breaking through his walls of grief. And somewhere in those 6 weeks, the arrangement stopped feeling like a business transaction and started feeling like something else entirely. She noticed it in small moments. The way Samuel's hand would linger on hers when he helped her down from her horse. The way his eyes sought her out across the dinner table. The way he laughed at her jokes. A sound that seemed to surprise even him. Thomas noticed too. Clara caught him watching them sometimes, his young face troubled, as if he was trying to decide whether to be happy or afraid. The fall cattle drive came, and the sale brought in decent money. Not quite enough, but close. They'd cut expenses to the bone and managed to save every penny. But when Samuel tallied the final numbers, sitting at the kitchen table with the ledger open before him, his expression was grim. "We're $800 short," he said quietly. "I could sell the horses, but even that wouldn't cover it. And it would destroy Thomas. Those horses are all he has left of his mother." Clara looked at the ledger, her mind racing. $800 might as well be 8,000. They'd worked themselves to exhaustion, sacrificed everything, and it still wasn't enough. "There has to be another way," she said. "There isn't. Tomorrow I'll go to town and talk to Hastings. Maybe I can negotiate a sale that at least leaves us with something to start over somewhere else." "No." Clara stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "We didn't come this far to give up now. Clara, we're out of options. Then we make new options." She paced the kitchen, thinking furiously. "What about the land itself? Are there other resources we haven't considered? Timber? Minerals? Nothing valuable enough to matter." Clara stopped pacing. An idea was forming, dangerous and desperate. "What about me?" Samuel looked confused. "What about you?" "I have a dowry. It's not much, $300 my parents left me. I've been holding on to it like a lifeline. But what good is a lifeline if we're drowning?" "Clara, no. That's your money. Your security." "My security is here." The words burst out of her before she could stop them. "This ranch, this life, you and Thomas. That's my security now. Money in a bank account in Boston does nothing for me. But using it to save our home? That matters." "Our home," Samuel repeated softly. "You really think of it that way?" Clara crossed to him, surprising herself with her boldness as she took his hands. "When I stepped off that stagecoach, I thought I was coming to be a housekeeper, maybe eventually a wife in name only. But these past weeks, Samuel, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. I found a place where I matter, where what I do makes a real difference. I found people who need me. And somewhere along the way, I started needing you too." Samuel stood, his hands tightening around hers. "Clara, I can't ask you to risk everything." "You're not asking. I'm offering." "But Samuel, we're still $500 short. My dowry helps, but it's not enough. So I need to know, is there anything else? Any other asset we haven't considered?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. Finally, he said, "There's one thing. My father's pocket watch. It's solid gold, an heirloom from Scotland. A collector in Denver has been asking about it for years. He'd pay $500 for it, maybe more. Then sell it. It's the only thing I have of my father's. I was going to give it to Thomas when he comes of age." Clara squeezed his hands. "And you will, because we're going to save this ranch, pay off the note, and by the watch back when we're on solid ground. This isn't giving up, Samuel. It's investing in Thomas's future. Before Samuel could respond, a small voice came from the doorway. Pa? Miss Clara? They turned to find Thomas standing there in his nightshirt, tears streaming down his face. I don't want the watch, the boy said. I want you both to stay. I want us to be a family. Clara's heart broke and healed simultaneously. She opened her arms, and Thomas ran to her, burying his face against her shoulder. Samuel wrapped his arms around them both, and they stood there in the lamplight, three people who'd been alone becoming something stronger together. You can send me back, Clara whispered, echoing the words she'd said so many weeks ago, but now they were a reminder of how far they'd come. Samuel pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. My son already chose you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. And so did I. 3 months later, Clara stood in the front yard of the Garrett Ranch, her ranch now, watching the sun set over the mountains. The foreclosure notice had been defeated, the bank note paid in full. Donald Hastings had been furious, but he'd kept his word about playing fair, perhaps out of respect or perhaps because he knew when he was beaten. Samuel's father's watch was displayed prominently in the general store in town, waiting to be bought back. It would take time, but they had time now. They had a future. Thomas ran past, chasing one of the new foals born just last week. His laughter rang out across the yard, a sound that had been absent for too long. He still missed his mother, he always would. But he'd learned that loving Clara didn't mean forgetting Martha. Hearts, it turned out, were big enough for both. Strong arms wrapped around Clara's waist from behind, and she leaned back against Samuel's chest. In 2 weeks, they'd have a proper wedding in the church in town. But in every way that mattered, they were already married, bound together by shared struggle and hard-won trust. Any regrets? Samuel murmured against her hair. Clara thought about the frightened woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach, unsure and unwelcome. She thought about the battles fought and won, the family forged in fire. Not a single one, she said. From the house, smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth and dinner and all the small comforts of home. This harsh, beautiful land had tested her, broken her down, and rebuilt her into someone stronger, someone who belonged. The mail-order bride had become a rancher's wife, a mother to a grieving boy, and a fighter in her own right. And as the stars began to emerge in the vast Montana sky, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had finally come home.